Zachary, a young boy, is skateboarding home, while his mother, Helen, is at home using her tablet to schedule a smear test. Their relationship appears strained. Zachary expresses dissatisfaction with the contents of the fridge and opts to prepare cereal. Helen advises him not to finish all of it, so they will have some left for the morning. Annoyed by the constant clicking of her tablet, Zachary asks his mother, Helen, to turn off the sound. She refuses, stating she enjoys it, which only further frustrates him. After an argument, he sits at the table to eat. Helen attempts to engage him by asking about his exam results, but Zachary, agitated, responds that he received a B. She continues to try to initiate conversation, but Zachary, dismissive, tells her he is not her boyfriend, rejecting her attempt at casual dialogue. Zachary sarcastically suggests that his mother should look for a boyfriend on Tinder. He mocks her about her failed marriage, taunting her about her husband who abandoned them. Helen, however, expresses her desire to have a peaceful, argument-free relationship with him. Zachary retreats to his bedroom and starts his laptop. As he does so, a bird crashes into his window. Helen spills her coffee on the table. A stranger, Bob Bliss, appears and helps by rescuing the injured bird while Helen cleans up the mess. Bob knocks on the door, informing Helen about the bird and asking if he can come in to find a quiet space to tend to it. He gently places the bird in a box near the door and washes his hands. As he does, his eyes land on the books around the room, prompting him to ask if her son is a mathematician. Helen responds that Zachary is studying maths, physics, and chemistry. Bob mentions that he completed a PhD in physics a few years ago. His phone rings, but he chooses not to answer it. Zach comes downstairs, and the bird suddenly begins fluttering around the house. Helen opens the door, allowing the bird to escape. Meanwhile, Zach pours himself a glass of juice. Bob bids farewell to Helen, telling Zach that he lives nearby if he ever needs help with physics. Helen, sensing an opportunity, asks Bob if he would consider tutoring Zach to help improve his grades. Bob agrees, mentioning that he does indeed have some spare time. Meanwhile, a white-bearded man, who appears to be a scientist, explains Newton's second law of motion. The acceleration of an object is directly proportional to the net force applied to it and inversely proportional to its mass. As Bob tutors Zach on this principle, he notices a tattoo on Zach's arm. Zach explains to Bob that he got the tattoo to annoy Helen, though she hasn't noticed it yet. He confides in Bob, expressing that he feels his mother doesn't care about him. Bob reassures him, emphasizing that Helen cares deeply for him. Zach's father lives in Singapore with a new family. Later, Helen calls them to dinner. During the meal, she asks Bob for wine, but he declines, prompting her to drink it on her own. Bob encourages Zach to study the weights of horses and jockeys to predict the winner of an upcoming horse race. He then reveals to Helen that he works as a bookkeeper and has OCD, which leads him to constantly search for patterns in things, including words, as a way to maintain calm. Zach becomes frustrated and gets up to leave. Bob gently suggests that Zach's anger stems from his father walking out on him. Helen, feeling exhausted, reaches out and holds Bob's hand, expressing her fatigue. Bob quietly gets up and leaves. The following morning, a white-bearded man, presumably the scientist, explains Newton's third law of motion, emphasizing that for every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. As Helen gazes out the window, observing the birds chirping outside, she picks up the box where the injured bird had been. Upon examining it, she notices that the barcode number, when turned upside down, reads Bob Bliss. Helen's phone rings, interrupting her thoughts. It's the doctor, reminding her of an appointment and asking her to come to the clinic within the hour. Just as she hangs up, Zach enters, excitedly informing her that the horse he had picked for the race has won. He reveals that Bob had placed a bet and won £2,000. Helen, visibly frustrated, tells Zach that she no longer wants Bob to come around. Zach, angered by her response, accuses her of ruining anything good that comes into his life. Helen grabs her keys, preparing to leave. In a moment of frustration, Zach declares that he's moving to Singapore to live with his dad and calls her a derogatory name. Enraged, she slaps him. Zach, hurt and angry, runs upstairs to his room, leaving her behind as she storms out. Later that night, the doorbell rings. Zach answers it and Bob stands at the threshold. Without a word, Bob hands Zach half of the prize money, but Zach refuses to accept it, insisting it's not allowed. Bob also offers flowers for Helen, which Zach notices are her favorites. Convinced that Bob is stalking them, Zach angrily smashes the flowers on the kitchen shelf before retreating to his room. Bob, undeterred, follows him upstairs and enters the room. He asks Zach if he has learned anything about the Doppler effect, explaining that it's similar to the way time seems to move slower when you're young and faster as you grow older. Bob goes on to describe how, In the future, it will be possible to manipulate gravitational waves and harness the power of a black hole. Bob emphasizes that what they once thought was theoretical could in fact be achieved if Zach could master the necessary physics. Zach, clearly confused, watches as Bob reveals his arm, showing the same tattoo that Zach has. Bob explains that he's from the year 2062 and urges Zach to be kinder to his mother, warning that she won't be around much longer. He tells Zach that by the time he moves to Singapore, it will be too late, and he will spend the rest of his life regretting not cherishing the time with her. Bob tells him that Zach will grow distant, and even his own children will leave him. Helen returns home and pours herself some wine. As Bob's phone rings, she notices the cash on the table. Suddenly, Bob pulls out a gun. Helen answers the call, and the voice on the other end warns her that the man whose phone this is cannot be trusted, urging her not to leave her son alone with him. As she processes the information, a gunshot echoes through the house. Helen rushes to Zach's bedroom, panic-stricken, only to find that Bob has shot himself. Zach tells Helen that he loves her. The scene transitions to the far future, where the white-bearded man, Bran, meets with an older Zach. It is revealed that Helen has passed away at the age of 93, and they are at her funeral. Zach, now a scientist, had developed an anti-cancer serum in 2029 that ultimately saved his mother's life. Bran, however, expresses regret, telling Zach that he could have been a world-renowned Nobel Prize winner, just like Zach, but that Zach's actions had cheated him out of that future. In an alternate timeline, Zach and Bran were partners, working together to develop the wormhole, and they became billionaires. However, in this current timeline, Zach never went to Singapore, which means that he and Bran never met. Instead, Zach chose to devote his life to chemistry rather than physics. One day, while clearing out his spam folder, Bran discovered a video he had emailed to himself years ago, detailing the events of this alternate timeline. Bran pulls out a gun, demanding that Zach return to the original timeline and give him the time machine. Zach insists that he got rid of it, but Bran doesn't believe him. A struggle ensues as Zach attempts to grab the gun. In that moment, time rewinds to when Helen spills the coffee on the table. The episode ends with the bird smashing into Zach's window, but this time, Bob does not appear to retrieve it. Please like and subscribe the channel for more videos like these.